Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our today's webinar called the Eco Challenge One, Sustainable Agriculture. My name is Arturo Patiño from the Young Americas Business Trust, and today I'm pleased to present Sebastian Davis. He will talk about the basics of this category called Sustainable Agriculture of the Eco Challenge competition as a professional background. Sebastian is an expert in sustainability and shared value with a degree in economics at the University of Los Andes in Colombia. He holds a master's degree in corporate sustainability and environmental management at the University of Monash in Australia, and also an MBA from the Exeter University in the United Kingdom. He currently operates as the shared value chief at Postobon, the biggest beverage company in Colombia. He leads the projects that contribute to the Colombian development and the competitiveness of his organization. This presentation will be divided into three sections. The first of them is the sustainable reuse of byproducts from the manufacturing of fruit pulps. The second one is how to make agriculture interesting, aspirational, and desirable to youth of the 21st century. And the last one will be the section of questions. So welcome, Sebastian, and thank you for joining us today.
Arturo, thank you very much. It's my pleasure being here. As you mentioned, we will be talking about sustainable agriculture, and the presentation is divided in three sections, last one being questions. To begin, I would like to talk about Postobon, just so everyone is on the same page. Postobon has over 110 years of experience in the Colombian market. It's the Colombian leader of non-alcoholic beverages. We're part of the Organización Ardila Lule, which is one of the largest and most respected business groups in Latin America. Within Postobon's portfolio, we have over 30 nationally recognized brands, more than 379 SKUs, and 75 flavors. And we participate in the markets of carbonated drinks, isotonic beverages, energy drinks, fruit-based drinks, RTD teas, and bottled water. In Colombia, there are 23 bottlers, 60 distribution centers. We currently have over 1,487 routes that distribute our products, and we own over 1,455 trucks that distribute our products. In terms of packaging, we use PET, plastic, glass, bag-in-box, which is usually what is used in fast food chains, aluminum can, Tetra Pak, Doi Pak, Dupont line, and plastic bag. Part of the organization is Projugos. Projugos is the company that makes the pulps for the juice drinks that we have, and is located in Tuluá, Valle del Cauca, Colombia. It has different and several certifications, such as the ones that you see here on this slide: ISO 9001, 1401, BPM, Product Origin, HACCP, Kosher, amongst others. The first challenge that we want to present to everyone is sustainable reuse of byproducts from manufacturing of fruit pulps. For example, the use of peels of banana, orange, mango stones, etc. Currently, some of the byproducts that we use effectively are the byproducts of passion fruit, banana, orange, guava, and strawberry. These are used for cattle feed and are used in nearby farms to Projugos. Mango stones and mango peels cannot be, we currently don't separate it, and therefore are not being used for animal feed. We are disposing of that organic material in landfill. If you look at the graph on the bottom right, you can see that 61% of the byproducts that result from the process are used in farms, and 39% are disposed in landfills. The problem today, currently, the problem is mostly around what is being disposed in landfill, because we believe that there is a much more sustainable way of disposing of that organic material, and it actually can be used productively, and it can be turned into a profitable business. We have tried different approaches to managing organic material. However, some of them have been unsuccessful, and the main reasons are presented on this slide. First of all, there is inappropriate handling of mango leach at reception site. The reception site usually don't have an infrastructure where they can store it properly and manage the leach of organic materials. Secondly, there is a risk at reception of generating odors due to incorrect handling of decomposing organic material. That has presented problems for the company because local farms and neighboring communities have complained from the odors. Thirdly, there has been undercapacity for handling at reception site, which means that the rate at which they can use the organic material it's lower than the rate at which we produce the organic material. Therefore, there's always it's being accumulated, and it's causing some of the previously mentioned issues. There's also an awareness of legal implications resulting from breach of these contracts. We usually have contracts with several organizations, and not always they're aware of the legal implications of what happens if they don't meet the requirements that we have in our contracts. But at the same time, when those agreements are breached, with those contracts are breached, it is very common that the environmental authorities go to the projugos instead of going directly to the company managing the organic waste. Last but not least, there's difficulty using mango stones in animal feed. I mentioned that we're not currently separating mango stones from the peel, and therefore we're having to dispose both of them in the same way, which is landfill. It can be used as animal feed, but it needs to have some previous process, particularly turning the stones into smaller particles where they can be easily digested by animals. It is very important for both Postol and Projugos that organic byproducts are handled properly. Here are some of the reasons. The first is that we want to meet the company's environmental policies, a policy that's very important. Secondly, we need to meet legal requirements in terms of what it's stated in the environmental legislation and environmental regulation. We are also caring for the environment. Something that is similar but different from the ones above is that we need the byproducts to be handled at the rate or at a higher rate that we're producing the byproduct, therefore eliminating idle and waiting times. It cannot be a bottleneck the way that organic waste is being handled. Also, caring for the company's reputation and image, especially amongst neighboring communities where there have been complaints. And last, reducing or eliminating transportation and disposal costs. I mentioned that most of all of the mango is being disposed in landfill, and that costs for both the transportation to take it into landfill is costly, and also the permission to put it there is also costly. So if there is another way of managing those type of wastes, it'd be an economic saving. In terms of what we're generating, in 2014 we generated 9,828,130 kilograms of organic waste, of which 71% was mango byproducts. There is on the table on the left, you can see the kilograms produced for the different fruits. On the right, you can see the percentage of those fruits in terms of what the business, what we buy. It is also important to take into account when those wastes or when those fruits are being purchased and processed, because, for example, it is very different to compare mango, where usually only there are only 6 months where we buy mangoes. You can see April, May, and June being through mid-year being when mangoes are in season, and November, December, and January. During the rest of the months, usually there isn't much mango, and it is important that the solutions proposed take into account this, because it's not divided equally throughout the year. It has to be managed when the waste or the byproducts are being produced. Blackberries, on the other hand, are usually constant throughout the year. It has a peak during June, July, and August, but it usually, and September, but usually there is always season for blackberries. Because of the experience that we've had, we've looked at different alternatives. We know that it can be used for animal feed, 100% of it. It just needs some processing. We also know that it can be composted and used for enrichment of degraded soil. And we also know that it can be used for energy, for generating energy, usually in cogeneration. We've had, as I mentioned before, not the best experiences in projects of this nature, but we know that they are feasible, and it's only a matter of having a right project with the right management, looking at the right issues. These following tables are a bit more technical, but they might be important for when looking at different alternatives. Because, as I mentioned before, you could use it either for animal feed, and then you have, for example, fat or crude fiber, protein, and that's important when looking at the technical specification of animal feed, but also humidity, dry matter, mineral fraction, that is important when looking at generating energy. So I'm not going to go into detail because this is quite technical information, and it's probably best if people have a look at this in more detail and more time. But we've got these for mangoes, same for passion fruit, blackberries, and please notice that there are two columns that are differentiated. It's not the same to talk about the pulp. The first column, actually the third column, the one that says BR 3100, it's pulp, and BR 3101 is the seed of blackberries. We also have it for guava byproducts, banana byproducts, and lulu byproducts. Some people might not know what lulu is. I encourage people to look on the internet to see what lulu is. So that is the first section. What we're looking is basically any idea where byproducts can be used in the amounts that they're being produced. But particularly, we have an issue with mango stones and mango peels. Therefore, any solution that we would expect would include mangoes and other byproducts, but particularly mangoes, where right now this position is being more difficult and is being less sustainable because we're using a landfill. The second section, the next question is how to make agriculture interesting, aspirational, and desirable to youth of the 21st century. This is particularly important in Colombia, but it's also an issue that is being identified in other countries in the continent. There is a document that was published last year. It's called the Rural Mission. It describes the findings of a study on the potential of Colombian agriculture. It was written by José Antonio Ocampo, who is a former Minister of Agriculture. And a lot of the information here has been taken from that document. So if anyone wants to go in depth in some of the points here, they can refer to that document. The rural mission says that there are three basic premises to take into account when proposing agricultural development policies. The first is the participatory territorial approach. That means that any solution has to recognize the difference between what's happening rurally and in urban areas in Colombia, but most importantly, it has to include its inhabitants as part of the development. They're responsible for their development. It relates, but it's not only regards philanthropy as solutions. Philanthropy are well and all, but more share value, sustainable solutions are the ones that are being sought, where people living in rural areas take charge of their own development. Secondly, the other premise is that rural development has to be considered as an integral process. That means that it has to include social and productive inclusion for everyone, and it has to include not only education and health and productive development or the economy. It has to include all of the above. People in small farmers usually suffer from both exclusion, both social and productive exclusion, meaning that they don't usually have access to all the public services and infrastructure, but they also have difficulty connecting their products in a particular supply chain. They have difficulty selling their products. Lastly, it is important to recognize the need to stimulate a competitive and environmentally sound rural development. In Colombia and in other countries, sometimes productivity has been put first to environmental protection, and it has to look at both, and it has to prioritize both. We cannot have product development if we're destroying the environment, but we also don't want a pristine environment if people are going hungry and people are having basic needs unmet. So it has to look at both. And when looking at both, it has to look at the provision of public services that promote both agriculture and non-agricultural productive activities. Some of the reasons, or one of the reasons why people are moving from rural areas to urban areas is because they don't find services and offers that people usually find in urban environments. That means education, health, but also recreation and activities and everything that makes life worth living. In that document, a summary of what he finds as a diagnosis is that there is high concentration of land ownership, and there's also informality in possession rights. We're going to look at each one of these 5 points in more depth. Also, the diagnosis says that there's wide social gap between rural and urban populations. There's reduced access to productive resources, conflict between current and adequate use of soil, and that means usually that sometimes agricultural activities are being taken are being done in a region or in a manner that does not go well with the type of soil or the type of ecosystems that are there. Imagine, for example, agricultural activities in the Amazons where organic matter is not very, very thick. The layer of organic matter is not very thick, and therefore rotation is very important. If you have intensive agriculture in the Amazons, you're going to have a soil that's going to be depleted soon and is going to be probably turning to suffer from desertification. Finally, there is low legal compliance when using natural resources. Even though the legislation, environmental legislation, is quite wide in Colombia, application or following that legislation is a different matter. So when it comes to land concentration and informality, the graph on the bottom left shows that only 21.4% of people are owners and have legal rights on their property. 59% are occupants, meaning that the rights to that property are almost none. Holders, they have some rights. They might not have all the proper documentation and paperwork, but they can show that they hold that land, and therefore they can fight for the rights of using that land. But there is a large part of the population living in rural areas that they use or live in a property that they're exploiting, but uncertainty on how long they can do it, or somebody else claiming the ownership of the land is very, very high. On the right, there's the concentration part, where we can see on yellow the size of land, number of hectares, and on blue the amount of owners. And you can see that when we're looking at small properties, we have a large number of people owning small properties. And as you go to the right, you can see that the larger the property, the less people have rights on those properties. There is only a few percentage of people owning most of the land in Colombia. And if you put both graphs, and you look at both at the same time, you can identify a problem. I also mentioned that there's wide social gap between rural and urban communities. You can see that poverty, in extreme poverty, and what is called multidisciplinary poverty, has reduced over the past years, both in semi-urban, which are rural communities, but are small towns or where people are living together, and they don't have a farm as such, or they don't live in a farm as such. That's the semi-urban, and scattered. And you can see how semi-urban has reduced and has but the gap between that reduction is still quite large. It is said that 89% of rural population is either very poor, very vulnerable, and it's more likely that they fall into extreme poverty, because access to health, education, productive services are lower or are less likely for them to have access on scattered areas. The above graphs have to be also looked at with this slide, where you can see that provision of social services in rural life are either access is quite reduced, especially when talking about education and health. Those services are scattered, and quality is usually lower than those provided in urban areas. Secondly, there is high informality in labor. That means that when in Colombia, when people have a formal job, they have to contribute to welfare, and they have to contribute to pensions. And because there's high informality here, it means that pensions are almost inexistent, and something that we have that is the family welfare fund is access to those services are quite reduced. Thirdly, there are several projects promoting social development that have increased the well-being of people living in rural areas. However, most of them have been done through subsidies, and they are they are part of a project that started in 2012. So you can see that there has been positive impacts, but gap is still wide, and there is lack of offer in social services. It's important to take into account that demographics are changing in rural areas. That is basically because people of a working age are usually going to cities where they can either find a job easier or make more money, and they're leaving their parents, which are usually older, and their children in rural areas. That means that you're finding very young people and very old people in rural areas, and the most productive people are going to cities. That's a change in demographics, and that's why the challenge is to promote or create ideas or come up with ideas that changes that trend. Something else that happens in rural areas is that women are suffering from double gender discrimination. That means that there has been an effort for women, women have made an effort to educate themselves better, gain higher degrees, but it's harder for them to find better jobs, or that has not translated into better working opportunities. So you're finding one way of discrimination there. But also, women in rural areas are suffering because they have excessive working loads of activities that are either non-remunerated or have no recognition. Most of them are either done, for example, in agriculture or homes. That is even so. That's when you find double discrimination. They have higher working loads compared to urban women of non-recognized activities or non-remunerated activities, but they're also having more difficulty finding jobs, even though they're more capable or are more educated than some men. And lastly, there is reduced access to home ownership. Most projects sponsored by the government of social housing are being promoted in urban areas and not in rural areas. There's reduced access to productive resources. That means that people, as we saw before, have either no access to land or they have informal ownership, which makes risky any agricultural activity or any activity that exploits land. It also means that there's reduced access to productive technology that includes, but is not limited to, better seeds, better technical assistance, better applications or communications, and also reduce access to productive goods and infrastructure such as tractors, irrigations, machinery. That is making that is translating into a less competitive environment or less competitive agricultural capacity of Colombia compared to other countries. Small farmers and rural communities usually have also limited access to financial services, particularly credits. Therefore, they cannot invest in their activities. The supply of technical assistance is either not designed for small producers or cannot be offered to large numbers in scattered populations. It's very difficult to scale projects where one wants to promote technical assistance or one wants to educate people on how to be more efficient and productive in their activities. Institutions, particularly national institutions offering technical assistance, are quite stable. They have in the past been used for political motives, and therefore the leaders of those organizations have changed, or there have been other reasons for political motives that have made those leaders change quite often, and therefore there hasn't been a constant policy developed or a development focus or development policy to improve productivity in rural areas or agricultural productivity, particularly in small farms. Something else that is quite important and interesting for proposing ideas is that there is high uncertainty when selling the crops, and very related to that, there is very high uncertainty in commercial conditions. When a farmer plants mangoes or any other product, they usually haven't got a buyer, and therefore it is difficult for them to sell the products once they harvest, because they don't know exactly where to take it, and if they take it to to the regular markets, prices are quite volatile, and therefore they don't know how much they can get. When they plant, they won't know how much they'll get. It's quite an uncertain business, and that is very unattractive. Something that Postobon does is to promote agriculture and small farmers, and what has worked very well is that we have agreements where Postobon buys anything from 80% to 100% of the harvest. It also agrees on a just and competitive price that is maintained throughout the year, therefore reducing volatility. Something else that doesn't happen in regular markets is that Postobon pays on the same day. Sometimes when farmers take their crops to the market, it takes 30, 60, 90 days for them to receive the money, and if they're small farmers, they depend on that money. And sometimes they don't even get money; they get some sort of other type of pay, something like agricultural inputs, which they can use, but they cannot live off them. Lastly, the infrastructure, especially what we call tertiary roads, which are not the main roads but are the most rural roads, are not in a very good condition, making harder for farmers to take their produce to markets. What is being proposed, and something that we would like everyone to take into account when proposing an idea, is that any solution has to be scalable. It has to take into account that populations, especially those most in need, are scattered. It also has to focus on meeting basic needs and basic elements such as nutrition, food security, literacy. It also could include more effective and flexible health and education services. It's not the same in urban areas where you have people living around school and it's easy for them to get there, than it is in rural areas where sometimes children have to walk 2 or 3 hours to get to school each way. So flexible and effective education and health services could be part of a solution. It is very important that there is no welfareism or protectionism. Rural communities need to be active in their own development. They need to be empowered, and they need to take responsibility for their own development as well. Of course, we're looking for projects that where organizations such as Postobon or NGOs or other organizations they promote, they help, they contribute. But it is important that the projects or the ideas have a shared value, the shared value principles, so they can be sustainable and competitive. Solutions or ideas have also need to take into account how to create a comprehensive productive development program. That means that either creating associations or cooperatives where people can have economies of scale, where people can have better negotiation power, where they can get better access to technical assistance, and where they can basically share and work together to improve everyone's well-being. It has to increase productive inclusiveness, or it could increase the idea could increase productive inclusiveness, meaning making easier for farmers not only to sell their products. That is actually not the hardest part. How to take that product to the market, how to put together the whole logistics of it is also where we're finding some of the widest gaps. Innovation and increased access to proactive infrastructure for small producers could also be a solution. How to create an irrigation system that is less expensive, more effective, that could probably be used with less technology, or any other initiative that increase productivity. Ideas that could help communicate and facilitate access to agribusiness development offers. That means that there are loads of offers right now for farmers and small farmers. Some are from the government, some are from private sector, some are from from NGOs, but those farmers usually don't know those initiatives. They're not being communicated to them. They haven't got the capabilities to apply to those offers, and therefore some solution could be how to put together all of those offers and help them get access to those offers. Something that is really important is how to massively start a process of land ownership and formalization, and initiatives that look at long-term and scalable systems. I just want to give one example here. If you plant a mango today, it will start producing mangoes in about 4 to 5 years, and it will just start. It will be in peak production in about 8 years. If you just offer technical assistance for 1 or 2 years, it is very likely that the farmers are going to either give up or will not continue will not continue to look after the plantation the way it should be, and therefore productivity in the future will be reduced. So long-term and scalable assistance has to be could be a solution and has to be in your ideas. There is an ambitious inclusion strategy that could also be included in any of your ideas. That means increase access to financial services, especially for those who are not part of the financial system. They haven't got a savings account or a current account, and it's quite hard for them to get access to formal credit. How to offer comprehensive technical assistance and innovation, but that has to be translated into capacity building. People who have access to technology but don't know how to use it or don't know how to use it effectively, it's almost as if they didn't have it. So take into account that when creating an idea, when developing an idea. Thirdly, promote activities and rural services beyond agriculture. That is also something that can help attract more youngsters, and that is everything that people usually enjoy in cities that are not present in rural areas could be a solution. But again, take into account that it has to be scalable and it has to be sustainable from environmental, social, and a financial point of view, economic point of view. And lastly, a strategy that has worked is to promote associations and cooperativism for production, commercialization, logistics, processing, and take into account that if you strengthen social capital, you have a base to do a lot more. Most of the ideas that have been tested in rural areas have failed because there isn't enough social capital to sustain them. People are not good at working together, making decisions together, accounting for their actions. So social capital, supporting each other, is a good strategy to begin to develop everything else. I guess that is the summary of the second part of the challenge. Right now, I think I'm gonna hand it to Arturo again, so we can challenge all the questions and we can try and answer all the questions.
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. Thank you so much for your explanations. As you said, now it's time to pass to the section of question and answers. We have already some of them. And well, regarding the ambitious inclusion strategy that you mentioned in your presentation, the first question says, can I apply to the Eco Challenge if my initiative is to promote agriculture in the urban context?
Well, we encourage urban agricultural projects. However, they are not part of the challenge this year. It will probably be part of the challenge in other years. This is the second time that Postone participates in the Eco Challenge. Right now, we're looking more at rural initiatives because not only in the context of Colombia, it is easy to understand in the context of Colombia, where we have a peace process and where we believe that in order to have peace, there are opportunities in rural areas have to be created. That also happens in other countries of the region, even though they haven't got the conflict that we have right now or that we've had in previous years. So what we would like to encourage right now are ideas that promote opportunities and well-being in rural areas. Probably in the future we will include urban agriculture, but not this year.
Okay, thank you so much, Sebastian. The second question has to do with the possibility as well to apply for this category. It says, if my project aims to improve the quality of life in rural areas, can I apply to the Eco Challenge?
As I mentioned in the second section, some of the reasons why people are moving to urban areas is because they don't find services and infrastructure to increase their well-being. Therefore, any project that aims to increase well-being in farmers, in the population who live in rural areas, is very well received. That includes, but is not limited to, education, as I said, recreation, having fun, going to the movies, health. It's not only basic needs, but it's also the needs that go, higher in the hierarchy of needs. So any idea, any project that increases well-being, and that does not mean increasing the amount of items that a family owns necessarily, are very welcome. I like to use the phrase, anything that makes life worth living increases well-being, and therefore an idea that increases well-being is very well received.
Okay, Sebastian, thank you. Regarding your position in Postobon, our third question says, how can Postobon can support my project and in which conditions?
These there are several ways on which Postobon can contribute or support a project, and it will depend on the solution. If it's either for the first project or the second project, on the scale of the solution, on the time. But we are very open to different ways of supporting the idea. We can either support it through the prize that we're promoting right now, maybe through funding, maybe through communicating the idea so others can fund it, or through partnerships. More than the idea itself, what we would like to develop relationships where people are looking at how to improve well-being in rural areas and how to better use byproducts of industrial processes. So there are several ways in which Postobon can contribute to the projects, to support the projects. I guess that would depend on the specifics of the idea and the project itself.
Okay, thank you so much, Sebastian. Our last question says, do you suggest a strategy to include all the actors in my initiative?
Go that again, Arturo, please. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. It says, do you suggest a strategy to include all the actors in my initiative?
A strategy to include all the actors in your initiative. Well, firstly, I would say that you'd have to reduce the amount of actors to those that are most important. Identify your stakeholders, prioritize your stakeholders, and work with those who are most important. There are several strategies to prioritize stakeholders. You look at how dynamic or how interested or how much power they've got, how legitimate they are. But it is highly recommended that you limit the amount of stakeholders that you're going to be working with. Um, and that applies for both parts of the challenge. For the first, we're looking at the way you use byproducts. You'd have to look at the environmental authorities. You'd have to look at Projugos itself. You'd have to look at probably the people who would be owners of the projects or the neighboring community. And for the second one, you'd have to look at private sector companies working in rural areas, wanting to develop rural initiatives, the institutions, the government institutions, and also NGOs, and that very much depends on the region that you're looking at, because not only in Colombia but in other countries of the region, if you look at it and a particular area, a specific area, you'd have different players there, and you'd have, for example, NGOs that are only working on that particular area that are not working on other places. So the advice, the strategy would be identify your stakeholders and prioritize, and that prioritization, just work with those who are most important.
Okay, well, I think it was our last question. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for your time and your responses. They will be very helpful for all those who want to apply to this category of Eco Challenge. With this information, I think they will be able to get more tools to start or keep on developing their projects and ideas with environmental sense. Once again, thank you, and thank you for your time and your explanations, and thank you so much for joining us today to the audience. I think it's all for today. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much for organizing and putting together the challenge, and thank you everyone for participating on the challenge. We're looking forward to receiving many ideas, very innovative ideas, and